Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Jenna Dolecek. I'm going to be talking to you today about how to bring bad guys to justice using open source and international criminal investigations. So thank you for your time. Let's go ahead and get started. So just a little about me. I've been in open source almost 10 years. I have a background in political science in Middle East and Russian studies. I have a master's and an LLM in international human rights and humanitarian law. And the reason I mention that is because I obviously don't have a background in open source yet. I still do work in this area. So you don't necessarily have to have a hard background in open source, but you can learn things along the way. So I mostly focus on conflict, human rights, atrocity crimes, and I helped build an open source unit at the United Nations from scratch. I work with a lot of NGOs. I've worked with domestic and international courts, and I currently work with an organization where I work with a lot of NGOs in gathering evidence to build cases. So we have all experience levels here today. So some of you may be familiar with what I talk about and some may not. So please bear with me if you are aware of some of these things, as others may not be. And at any point, if I talk too fast, please let me know. I have a habit of, getting excited talking about open source. And last but not least, there will definitely be time for questions at the end. So we're going to talk a little bit about differences in NGO and criminal investigations, what investigations look for, how it's done, what we use, some examples of how NGO work helps investigations, and how it's used in court. All right. So I just wanted to touch on this real quick, the difference between OSINT, OSINT, and OSINT, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. But when working in an active criminal investigation, which involves lawyers, case building, evidentiary standards, and admissibility, your words matter. So you should really only be using the word intelligence if you work within the intelligence community or are actually producing actionable intelligence. Otherwise, it's just information. The word intelligence has implications, so I never refer to what I do as OSINT. I may use the hashtag in posts because that's what everybody else uses. But when we are writing a report or debriefing, I never use that word because that's not what I'm producing. So in general, I just use open source and then specify if it's information, techniques, or investigation. People have many interpretations of what open source is. And while the discourse is important, I prefer to keep it simple. Open source is anything publicly available, free or paid, that is not government or military intelligence or any other sort of confidential information. So there can be an issue with people going around and saying that they're doing something, but they're not, and that can have consequences. So when you're working in a criminal investigation, your words really matter. Okay, so into the more important stuff. So there are differences, different types of investigations that use open source information and techniques. So today I'll be talking about NGO investigations and formal criminal investigations, largely focusing on human rights and armed conflicts. So every organization has some sort of mission or vision or goals. And for NGOs in this arena, that could be to educate, to preserve for truth and memory, to advocate, or to assist with justice and accountability. Criminal investigations are extremely restrictive and have a lot of rules. So their purpose is to document crimes, determine perpetrators and command responsibility, and build cases for prosecution. So there's different evidentiary standards. NGOs strive for really high quality work, which they should, but not all of them think in terms of submitting evidence. So they may skip certain things that would be integral to a case, like chain of custody. So criminal investigations have to consider, jurisdiction, admissibility, chain of custody, and standards of proof. There's also different jobs. So NGOs don't have to have lawyers on their team or even people with a background in law or investigation. Criminal investigations have to involve lawyers and law enforcement in order to build cases to file in a court. So an NGO investigation honestly might lead to nothing. They might just issue reports for public awareness and advocacy, which is still really important, don't get me wrong. But if you're somebody who wants a little more tangible results, then you might want to work in a traditional criminal investigation. However, investigations can also take many years. So if you need more instant gratification, then traditional investigation may not be for you. But if you do just want to to contribute, to help, to increase awareness, then NGO investigation is much easier to get into, and it doesn't require certain qualifications like a law degree or being a police officer or a detective. So let's take Myanmar, for example. So for those who don't know, Myanmar in Southeast Asia experienced a coup back in 2021 and is now run by a junta, or a military regime. They have also been in a civil war between the military and government, against a lot of its various ethnic groups for decades. So I've worked for both of these organizations. We have Myanmar Witness is an open source NGO that only focuses on Myanmar. And then we have the UN Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. Super long name. I just call it the mechanism. Some people call it the IIM. But they both only focus on the conflict in Myanmar. So Myanmar Witness, they only focus on crimes that happened on or after the coup. So really just the last 4 years. And not even just crimes, but just kind of events in general, themes, things like that. They have a lot of freedom in collection and analysis and reporting. It's largely investigator-led, which is actually really special within the field because researchers and investigators themselves can put forward ideas to investigate. And as long as it falls within the mission and resources, they're kind of allowed to look into whatever they want, which is really, really great. So they can also be vocal and advocate because it's an independent NGO. They can publish public reports and data, but they only use open sources. So for the UN mechanism, they investigate, they're mandated by the Human Rights Council at the UN to investigate crimes from 2011 on. So that's a huge chunk of time. That is a lot of work, a lot of resources. So they can only also investigate crimes, not just events, but qualifying crimes within that time frame. It is lawyer-led, so the senior legal officers and directors tend to determine kind of the case files, although there are other lawyers and investigators on the team that can kind of push for their maybe event or crime to be involved. But they really focus on crimes with kind of the strongest evidence that may also fit into a larger pattern or things like that. So they can't be vocal and advocate due to politics. Unfortunately, they are based out of the UN. So only the director is actually allowed to make public statements. And even then, they're pretty general. They cannot publish about 99% of their findings because it is an active criminal investigation. So civil society tends to get a little frustrated with the mechanism for not putting out more information or updates or how the mechanism uses the information that civil society has provided. But they can't because safety of victims and witnesses is a top priority. So that's why no criminal investigation, whether it's domestic or international, ever share information until the trial is started or is over. So those are just kind of some differences between a formal investigation and kind of an NGO investigation, even though they're looking at a lot of the same things and kind of working towards the same goal. So what do criminal investigations look for? And that depends on the investigation. For an armed conflict, we need to prove that a crime has taken place, a conflict is taking place. Humanitarian law violations or war crimes have occurred, and who is responsible. So in general, we're interested in qualifying crimes. So unfortunately, not just all of the really awful things that have occurred, but awful things that qualify as a crime. So unfortunately, we just simply cannot investigate everything, even though it deserves it, because it's just not possible. So we need to know about victims and perpetrators, who committed the crime and who was affected. And then we have command responsibility. So once we determine the perpetrators, then we need to find out who was in charge or who had the authority to issue orders. So overall, different crimes require different evidence. So if you're working with the International Criminal Court, then crimes must fall under their own statute, which determines the court's jurisdiction and lays out the qualifying crimes. Regional and domestic courts have their own criminal codes, admissibility rules, and jurisdiction as well. So depending on where you're filing your case, that may change what you need or how things are done. Then we have universal jurisdiction. And that's a legal principle that says that some crimes are so horrific that any court around the world has a responsibility to try them. So universal jurisdiction cases are mostly tried in domestic courts. And countries still want there to be some sort of a connection between what happened. So like the perpetrator is from that country, or the victim is from that country, or they know that the perpetrator is in that country so they can arrest them. So that's usually called conditional universal jurisdiction. And there's quite a few conditional universal jurisdiction cases happening around the world right now. So to prosecute any of these crimes in court, you have to prove different things. So human rights violations, you need to know what rights have been violated and if that country is a party to that treaty. Because if not, then we kind of can't do anything there. For crimes against humanity, we need to prove that it's widespread and systematic. So we have to prove kind of a pattern. And then for war crimes, was there a violation of the Geneva Conventions? And then finally, for genocide, is a specific group being targeted for their identity, and is it an official policy, whether of the government or the organization? And genocide is the hardest to prove. It has the highest standard of proof. So how's that done? So this is more of the fun part, more of the open source. So through monitoring, collection, analysis, and investigation. So we need to actively monitor media and social media to know what's going on and find possible evidence. Then we need to collect that evidence before it disappears and preserve it. Then we analyze and determine what's being shown. And then finally, we either launch a full investigation into the crime, or we see how that evidence fits into an ongoing investigation. So most people nowadays think of open source as just social media, but really that's only one type of open source material. But the reason that it's so important is that it may show a crime, it may show the aftermath, it could show victims and perpetrators, or it could give us clues to figuring those things out. So event verification is a huge part of what we do. So we need to figure out the who, what, when, where, and possibly how, but it's extremely rare to get the why. That pretty much only happens through interviews with people. But as I mentioned before, we have to establish chain of command. Who was in charge? What authority did they have? And I'm currently finishing up a contract to determine chain of command in regards to detention centers. And I just started looking at another case of detention, but in a different country. So those things are really, really important for cases. This is one of the most important pieces, because if we can't establish command responsibility, then we have no case to file, we have no one to charge, and we have no arrest warrant to issue. So for event verification, we analyze our photos and videos. So to get the where, this is done through geospatial analysis, which is my favorite part and probably a lot of your favorite parts, using maps, satellite imagery interpretation, and other GIS data to geolocate. For the when, we use chronolocation to determine the time of day by calculating the length of shadows. For the what, how, and who, we compare our findings from photo and video analysis with other open source data, and we refer to this as data triangulation. So rarely do you have all the information or find it all in one place. You have to bring everything together and make sense of it. Again, for chain of command, photo and video analysis, we look at patches and uniforms. For Myanmar, we look at the stickers on the butts of rifles, and that determines what unit they belong to. And we also use regime announcements and documents, because this might tell us what rank somebody holds, what unit they were assigned to, or maybe what what base they're stationed at. So all of these things you can find in open sources and can be extremely useful. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools we use to do this. These were tools that I used at the UN and that I currently used with NGOs. They're all a mix of free and paid. So If you're in this arena, in this work, and you're maybe not sure what to use, or you're interested in getting into this work and want to know what we use, this is just kind of a basic overview of different kinds of tools. So starting with preservation, for criminal investigation, preservation is extremely important because you have to be able to demonstrate the chain of custody. So ideally, you need something with built-in hashing, or you have to hash by hand. And for those that don't know what hashing is, it's a long string of letters and numbers that acts as a digital fingerprint for a piece of content. And that's how we prove that it hasn't been tampered with, edited, manipulated since we collected it. So that's critical to evidence and admissibility in court. So Web Preserver by PageFreezer, that's a paid tool that can forensically capture a lot of different types of online content. And it gives you a forensic report with who collected it, at what time, hash values, and other information. Forensic OSINT's a little more wallet friendly and does have a limited free version. Or you can use Bellingcat's Auto Archiver in conjunction with Google Drive or Google Sheets. That's how we did it at Myanmar Witness for a long time until we switched to Atlas. And Atlas is a database that has built-in archiving and preservation. Right now, it's free for individuals, and then they do have tiered prices for organizations. For archiving, Fireshot is a free screenshot browser extension that has free and paid versions. Fastone is another. It only has a free 7-day trial. And these two normally do not come with metadata or forensic metadata and hashing. It is just a screen capture tool. For websites, if you want to save it before it disappears, obviously the Wayback Machine or Archive Today are great resources. But just a reminder that plain screenshots do not hold up well in court. They need to have forensic metadata and hashing. So archiving isn't enough. It needs to be forensically preserved. GIS, I said, maybe everybody's favorite. So we pretty much live off of Google Earth since it's free, has tons of functionality, although unfortunately the imagery is quite limited. But if you're able to, maybe you can get a hold of Planet imagery, which is some of the best resolution out there, and it's fairly affordable for organizations. So we use Planet a lot. There's also Copernicus, which used to be Sentinel Hub. It's now changed to Copernicus. It has very low resolution, but it is good for change detection using time lapses and other bandwidths to visualize. And then ArcGIS is an insane beast of a program, but it is amazing because of all the things that it can do with satellite imagery and mapping. So it's a very common one, but it is expensive and it is quite kind of difficult. It's a big learning curve. For Mapillary, Mapillary is other Street View imagery. So when Google Maps doesn't have Street View imagery available, Mapillary might. So I use Mapillary a lot for Myanmar because there's very limited Street View imagery. And even though Mapillary doesn't have everything, it might have that one piece that you need. So I still go and check it just in case. There's also OpenStreetMaps, which again can give you lots of different map layers, but users can also go in and identify buildings or other sorts of infrastructure that might be of interest. So OpenStreetMap has definitely helped us identify really important things as well. You just have to keep in mind it is user-based, so you want to try and verify that information as much as you can. We also use these three right here, WorldView, Zoom Earth, and Satellites Pro for just additional satellite imagery. Some might be clearer than others or more up to date than others. And then NASA Firms is a really popular one. We use that for fire detection. So that can help us confirm that maybe a missile or a bomb or some other type of large weapon that can cause fires took place. But the fire still has to be big enough and have a strong enough heat signature for the satellite to detect it. So not all of them are able to be picked up, but a lot of them are. And you also have to be careful because it picks up a lot of agricultural fires. So you do also need to make sure that it's just not an agricultural fire, basically. And then we use SunCalc for chronolocation to do the calculation of shadows. And then finally, there's tons of other GIS databases, And one of them that we used a lot at the UN was MIMU, which is the Myanmar Information Management Unit, which does also come out of the UN. But sometimes you can find very country-specific GIS data sets like that, which are incredibly helpful in our work. All right, next we have photo and video analysis tools. If you're lucky enough to work in an organization that has a lot of resources at its disposal, AMPT is an amazing software for photo and video analysis. It can brighten dark videos, which I know other programs can do, but it's really, really good at it. De-blur things and lots of other types of functionality. It's heavily used by law enforcement. But I did do a demo of it and got a little bit of training, and it's pretty amazing what AMPT is able to do. But it is very expensive, so most people don't use it outside of law enforcement. If you have Adobe, you can also use Premiere Pro, which is video editing, and it can do a pretty decent job at some deblurring and lightening, but maybe not as good as some other types of software. But it's definitely better than nothing. And then just VLC Player, you can do that to extract still frames from videos, but you can't do a whole lot of other editing in it. But VLC is free. There's also OpenShot Video Editor, which is a free online video editing tool. And then we use the InVid plugin to determine if something has maybe been edited or manipulated, and also puts it through the video through automatic reverse image searches. So this is a very popular plugin. Forensically is able to detect image manipulation, like duplication, but it is kind of in a beta format, so you have to be a little bit careful with that tool. There's also PimEyes for facial recognition. Unfortunately, that's not free. You do have to pay for those results. There's Let's Enhance, which is, again, another like photo enhancing tool. And then, of course, the core three for reverse image searching, which is Google, Yandex, and TinEye. But you should always test all three of them because all three of them might have different results, which is really interesting. TinEye is usually good at determining when something first was posted, but it doesn't always work. And then Google and Yandex are good at just finding other places where it was posted and other versions of it. But always test it out because, like I said, they can always come up with a little bit of different results. So then we have corporate databases and tracking sites. So if you're doing any kind of corporate investigation, financial investigation, which can be really, really important to even criminal investigation, these databases are kind of really, really important. So these three are free. The OCCRP, Open Sanctions, Open Corporates. Dun & Bradstreet is a really good database, but it is very expensive, so most organizations don't have it. Panjiva is great for shipping records. So looking at maybe tracking arms shipments or materials for explosives, things like that. Panjiva has shipping records, but in the free version, it's a little limited with basic information, and then you get the rest of the results after a paid version. I think most everybody's familiar with FlightAware, Flight Radar 24, the more bright flight tracking type of tools. There's Marine Traffic and Vessel Finder, but then some of you might be working with ground shipping, maybe looking at railways. So Open Railway Map is a map of all the railways in the world, and that might help uncover a specific route where maybe illegal goods are being transported or things like that. These are link charting and data visualization tools. So if you don't know what link charting is, when you're looking into people or like a criminal network, or you want to know maybe just somebody's associates, maybe sphere of influence, you're going to want to do some type of link charting. So what that means is you can map connections between people and visualize their network, basically. So these three here, Maltego, which probably everybody's heard of, Shadow Dragon, and Siren. These are all paid, although Maltego does have a free version. But these also have a lot of advanced search and analysis functionality. So they're really heavy programs and tend to be pretty expensive. Then there's Link Curious, which is a cheaper kind of link charting program. And then there's Kumu. Kumu does offer a free version, but it is public. So anything you put into your map is searchable by the public. So be very, very careful what you put in there. But a private account or a paid account is private. So you might need to use that option, but it is a little cheaper than some of the others. And then, of course, you can always do it for free and by hand if you have Microsoft PowerPoint. And then just a couple other data visualizations. There's Flourish, and there's also Tableau. Tableau does have a free version, but again, it's limited. Or you can use Microsoft Power BI. There's all kinds of tools out there. So this is just a very basic few that are available. And then finally, there's tool dashboards. So there's hundreds, if not thousands of tools out there, and it's impossible to keep track of them all. So I use dashboards when I need something. Tools come and go. So thankfully, there are people out there that keep track and update their databases. Bellingcat's obviously a very reputable one. You can trust them to have great tools, but then there's tons of users on GitHub that have their own collections. There might be a lot of overlap because a lot of us use the same tools, but it's worth looking at different people's collections because they might have other resources that some users don't. So that's why I tend to look at multiple users. And then one user came out with what they call an OSINT map, but basically it's a map overlaying open source tools specific to a country. So that's becoming more in demand lately, is knowing, what websites or databases do I use for a country in the Middle East or in Africa or South America. So some users have now started compiling country specific tools, which is really, really, really useful and cuts down on a lot of time trying to find those. So if you're working on whatever country, Nigeria, you can go to the map, click on Nigeria and see what tools they have available. Although I don't know if Nigeria is on there, so you'll have to look yourself. But then always vet your tools, especially if they're free and open source. We don't know who they come from, and we do need to make sure that they're secure, and also that they work properly and are giving you proper results. So you always want to maybe test some other information out to make sure that it works right before maybe you start putting in important information. All right, so let's look at some actual examples. So this is done by Myanmar Witness. Like I said, the open source NGO that focuses on Myanmar. They recently published a report about an airstrike on civilians. So according to available open source information, UGC claimed that an airstrike took place, that it happened on May 12th, and that it happened in a village in Sagai that I'm not going to try and pronounce, because my Burmese is not good. So using UGC, investigators were able to geolocate the village, and they probably used Planet or Sentinel satellite imagery, and maybe also NASA fire data to confirm damage, which helps us prove that an attack did take place. So in the posts, there were also photos of possible weapons remnants. However, we don't know that the photo was taken there for sure. Even if it was uploaded with the other photos, we can't confirm that this was actually at the village unless we were maybe able to talk to some other witnesses or something. So that is a limitation of open source NGOs, is we can only work with the information that we have. So we still don't know who did it, who was hurt, how it was done, or why. So we need to do some further investigation. So the SAC, which is the Security Administration Council, or the junta, pushed back against Myanmar Witness's investigation by saying it was disinformation. This is extremely common. It happens with basically everything they publish, and same for the mechanism, the UN mechanism. But that in and of itself is actually usable evidence. So even though they said that they didn't do it, they are acknowledging that they are aware of the attack, which is a legal criterion. So even a denial is usable evidence in an international investigation. So there were also photos of people assembling drone mortars. But if we go back to the previous slide and look at the school, so this building right here is allegedly a school. We can see the green paint, kind of this red wood, and then go back we can see again that kind of green paint and that sort of same wooden structure. Sorry. Here we go. However, we can't prove that that is or is not the same place because there's not enough information to confirm or refute. There's not enough clues in these photos of where they might be. So there's also photos of men in what appeared to be military uniforms. Unfortunately, because of the really poor quality, we can't see any sort of patches to confirm who they are. However, given the type of camouflage, as well as familiarity with what the military, ethnic armed organizations, and People's Defense Forces wear, Myanmar Witness concluded it was unlikely to be a People's Defense Force, but possibly members from an ethnic armed organization. That doesn't mean they were the perpetrators, but they are present. As for victims, the attack happened at a school. There were graphic photos, which I did not include. I also kind of blurred this one out a little bit, but that makes it extremely likely that the casualties were civilian, making it a possible war crime. So Myanmar Witness concluded that based on the available UGC, visible ordnance remnants, structural damage, and the presence of child casualties, it's highly likely that a strike was carried out by the Myanmar Air Force on a school in Sagaing. And while the date itself has not been independently confirmed, the absence of prior UGC, changes in satellite imagery, and consistency of timestamps all support the claims and reports that the event did take place on May 12th. So I wanted to pick an example that wasn't easy or clear cut, as they rarely are. This is a great example of admitting what you don't know, and you should never jump to conclusions or make baseless accusations, because it will really impact your credibility as an investigator and as an organization, and it can even get your case thrown out. So another way of open source is super helpful is through mapping and data visualization. So this is from Eyes on Russia, which is also from the Center for Information Resilience, like Myanmar Witness. And this helps criminal investigators visualize where things are happening. So are there clusters of data points? Is one region impacted more than another? Why might that be? What does this look like over time? You know, this map, this was built for us by C4ADS. This can help visualize maybe kind of the spread of conflict over time, or where attacks are grouped over time. But this can help us see patterns and trends. So depending on what the map is documenting, it can possibly show widespread and systematic, which is what we need to prove crimes against humanity. It can also show war crimes, maybe if data points are clustered in areas with civilians that are away from active conflict zone. It could even show genocide if one area is known to be home to a particular group and that area is impacted much, much more than other areas. So in working on a criminal investigation, all the information that we get from open source NGOs like Myanmar Witness or Eyes on Russia, even with their excellent methodology, we still have to re-verify it working in a formal criminal investigation. Not because necessarily we don't trust exactly what they've done, but we do just need to make sure if it's going in a case file that the analysis is correct. So, I mean, we re-double check everything just to make sure. So yeah, how is open source used in court? It's becoming increasingly harder to ignore and is making up more and more evidence submitted to courts. So at the ICC, the arrest warrant for Alware Folly was almost exclusively relied on photos and videos from social media, and it was the very first to do so. So that was actually pretty historic for our field for that to happen. So now, I mean, we believe that's only gonna keep happening going forward. They also created something called OTP Link, and that allows you to submit digital evidence directly to the Office of the Prosecutor. And then the ICC does now hire analysts that specialize in open source, but unfortunately, there is a hiring freeze across the UN and ICC. So if you do apply, you may not get hired for a while because of the funding crisis that's happening. So at the United Nations, they have investigative mechanisms. So they all collect open source content and they hire open source analysts, which is what I was. And we worked with courts on sharing open source material. Unfortunately, UNITAD, which focused on Islamic State crimes in Iraq and Syria, has been shut down, unfortunately, due to politics. But Syria is ramping up now that there's been a regime change. Unfortunately, Myanmar still does not have country access. So they're still focusing on a lot of open source content, but they are still working with witnesses. For domestic courts and universal jurisdiction, Ukrainian cases will heavily feature open source content because there's so much of it. Their government and police do collect it themselves, but they also collect it from other organizations like Eyes on Russia, Truth Hounds, or OSINT for Ukraine. The Federal Court of Argentina was the first to take up a universal jurisdiction case in Myanmar regarding the Rohingya genocide. And at the mechanism, excuse me, we did share open source information with them. There's many pending criminal complaints in courts around the world that are using open source as evidence. So keep an eye on that because we'll definitely be getting some updates within the next year or so on all those cases. And then finally, we are training judges and lawyers. We're getting courts ready to admit and understand open source evidence. The True Project, based out of Swansea University, has done a lot of work in this area. Several organizations have held mock trials centering on open source evidence to test it, and it's going very well. Judges have been very receptive, but they do get hung up on things like algorithms because you can't replicate the internet since it's always changing. But that's why forensically capturing metadata is so important. Many groups are coming out with, there's working groups coming out with guides to help with standardization, like the Berkeley Protocol. And then finally, there's the training of national investigators, analysts, and police on how to collect and use open source evidence. So last year, I trained national intelligence analysts on how to use open source content for finding missing children. And I'm currently working with another organization where we're looking for missing adults. So thank you everybody so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming today. And now I would like to open the floor to questions.